Welcome back. Um, Today we're going to do the rest of chapter 1 of Just Gonna Let Them Hate by Stolly Kitty 013. So yeah, let's get into it. Thor does not like the spider child. That's not to say he does not like children. He, in fact, quite enjoys the innocent company, the eyes filled with naive wonder, and they were excited by the littlest of things, impressionable and obedient to adolescent orders and requests. Though they scream and cry, sometimes they were cute in rays of sunshine in the otherwise bleak face of reality. They hadn't yet been broken by life, and were blissfully ignorant of problems and harsh ways of the world they live in. But Parker was not like other children. He was a child, though he did not have the age he had the age characteristics of one. He was joining them on the battlefield. He was facing the harsh world in the face without being prepared to do so. He had not yet seen the real world and was not prepared to fight in battles that involved the Avengers because of his naivety. He held them back with his childish antics that had no place on the battlefield. Either that or he'd run when his comrades must ride on him. He also did not light up in wonder like normal children would at certain things, like the presence of the Avengers. He in fact tried to run away from them. He was snarky and sarcastic, didn't follow orders or authority, and though it had worked out for him so far and no one got hurt, it still angered the god, because Parker was getting away with most things he shouldn't have. The good captain had made an effort to set him straight, but had fallen upon deaf ears of the arrogant boy. He was not at all like young Keener, who, although sarcastic and snarky, was nearly a year older and didn't get into battles directly. Then again, young Keener was not enhanced or mutated or had any form of training outside of self-defense lessons he and his fellow comrades had taught. But that was the issue. Young Parker thought he had to use the powers given to him and didn't know they could be a burden. He thought it was all fun and games. It would soon get someone hurt. Hadley was a perfect example of the reason he loved children. He could take a joke with the Avengers and listen when they told him to hide. Thor thought much like the rest of his Avengers adored him. He was smart, helpful when repairing damage or destroyed gear. He helped and didn't get into fights, unlike Parker, who only used violence and destruction of his enemies as his answer. He did not lose his innocence as well. There was something dark, though, that frankly scared Thor inside of Parker. It was the thing that made him avoid and ignore the young boy. Instead of recommending him like the captain, he didn't think that Captain saw it, though, because he was sure Rogers would be afraid of it too if he did. It was terrifying to see, especially in a child. There was something Thor noticed was because he had seen it in his own brother. The darkness of seeing something you weren't supposed to, of being stripped of innocence so young in age, having been treated like an outcast and knowing nothing more than just that. Watching a scene of happiness, knowing that you'll never get the same. The haunted look mirroring from green to brown eyes was identical to that of his brother's. His brother's defense mechanism was to act out and try and take over Asgard. Violence was his answer. Parker's answer seemed to be humor, which was things better than Loki's, but it still scared him and annoyed him. Though different tactics on dealing with it, it was the same problem. The longing look in his eyes, that behind his mischievous spark, wanting to be treated as something better. And maybe that's the real reason Thor avoided Parker. He reminded him of Loki, reminded him of how he failed his brother, and if he tried to console Parker, you'd surely feel the same way. There were so many things he could do differently with his brother, but that's only because he knew his brother all of his life. He only just met Parker, and it could not change any mistakes that he had had made. Loki and Parker were only similar in that one sense, and not in any others. He wouldn't know how to fix young Parker, even if he could, but instead of feeling remorse at the fact, he felt anger, and he took it out on the young child. "I'm sorry to bother you, but we're landing in like 5 minutes," Parker said, his hands hovering over Thor's arm as if afraid to touch it. Thor's brow furrowed as he ripped the hand, maybe a little too harshly away, and Parker stumbled back immediately. He did not just look demeaned or scared, just looking at him with unreadable eyes. "You do understand the challenges we'll face out there, correct?" he said more than a little coldly, and Parker looked up at him confused, cracking his head like a small dog, reminding Thor of all that stripped innocence, taunting of his own mistakes. "It's better to leave than getting over your head, especially when your comrades of mine are counting on you," Thor said, stepping up to Park, who did not move. He wanted to make it clear that a child did not belong here, that if anything happened to people he loved because of the boy's childish antics, it would be met with harsh and serious consequences, preferably administered by Thor or even Natasha herself. Black Widow was indeed intimidating, far more than any warrior of Asgard. Peter paused before grinning lopsidedly. "You count on me? Oh, that's sweet," the child said lightly, and Thor felt his anger flare at the child takeaway. "This is not a game," Thor said tightly, trying not to yell, not to let his anger show, just as Peter was fast successfully not letting his fear of this fallen machine. Parker may be a kid, but surely he knew at least that if he messed up enough, innocent people would be killed. Yeah, but still. Peter shrugged nonchalantly, and Thor picked him up by the back of his coat, having looked the guard direct in his eyes, furious. Furious at the nonchalance. Look at the guard directly in his furious eyes. The nonchalance was insufferable at this point. Inappropriate, really, because people's lives were at stake. People that they were trying to protect. "You must follow your orders. You cannot avoid consequences of me. This is not a joyride of your awarded powers," Thor said lowly. Peter looked at him directly in the eyes. "Although I do not know why you were given such ability at such a young age, it is unfit for your inexperienced child to have such power and waste as you do," Thor continued in his harsh tirade. "You could have, said that, 10 years ago, given the speech and everything," Peter muttered after a moment, letting something other than his irritating humor come into his voice. It pissed off that he couldn't distinguish it. "You don't understand. Can't that lecture? I've already had it." Peter sighed, letting the boredom take over his tone. He was holding something back, because his voice sounded a little too strange not to actually care. "And I wasn't, how do you put it, awarded these powers? Things happen, accidents happen, we're the Avengers for." Peter shook his head and went on to make that point. "I don't avoid consequences. No one dishes them out. Besides," Peter smiled, "everything seems to work out in the end." Thor slammed him down, and Parker was caught off balance due to an odd angle and fell on the ground. "We shall see about that." Peter reminded him of his kids. Kent did not want his kids to end up like him, being a killer, spy, or agent of S.H.I.E.L.D., for S.H.I.E.L.D., or even associated with S.H.I.E.L.D. at all. He wanted his kids to be able to trust other people like normal people, not be paranoid about their family, current and future. He didn't want them to look over their shoulder and expect danger. He wanted them to be carefree and have fun lives, and live their lives in daylight and not in the shadows. Parker was a perfect example of what he never wanted his kids to be, but also I think he wanted his kids to be too. That, on top of things that pissed him off about Peter Parker, in fact, that pissed a lot of people off, he didn't seem to give a shit that they did, in fact, have a shit list especially for them. He seemed to encourage it, actually. He was harsh, reckless, disobedient, never following orders, went off on his own, disappeared for days, only to come back casually for his movie. He was unreliable to the Avengers, and unreliable to probably everyone else in his life. Hell, he was probably skipping school for this superhero shit, if he ever bothered to go at all anymore. He acts like he knows everything and acts like he is too good for something, like a teenager, which he fucking is. He doesn't listen to anyone and has no regard for safety. But again, S.H.I.E.L.D. couldn't hold him down. A professional organization probably could say that they can control Superman. It was too hard to even monitor. That was the only bit of Peter that he wanted to hand down to his kids. The fact that he could come and go as he pleased in the S.H.I.E.L.D., unlike the Avengers, S.H.I.E.L.D. couldn't tell him what to do, just asked if he could do it. And Peter could say no to S.H.I.E.L.D. He could piss off about anyone in that organization and get away with it. And Fury seemed to support that. He seemed to find letting Peter come and go with no warning permission, and Theory didn't waste any resources on tracking him down. They never needed to, because they could give less than a shit about him. Unlike the rest of old Parker, he could not stress this enough, could not be martyred. It was impossible, and that pissed Clint off even more than anything. Clint had never asked questions like Peter did. He never said no to S.H.I.E.L.D. He thought that it was a given coming in, no questions asked, and he kicked himself for it later because the kid came in and done just that, said no, disobeyed orders, stood up for himself. He was everything that Clint couldn't do because he thought it was impossible. And Peter Parker was anything but possible. He was confusing and managed to put almost everyone working with him at risk. He couldn't even imagine how much trouble Parker's family, of whom he never talked about Strange, would be in. His loved ones must be in hell trying to reel this kid, whose ego was so big that it decided to screw everyone in New York over just because he could. He never told Peter about his children, like, ever. Even if held at gunpoint, just kept harassing the kid until he left his life for good. Left the team and his family alone. And that was the thing. He was still a kid. He acts as if he knows what's going on, but he doesn't. Just like every other kid in the world he doesn't understand the dangers. He doesn't get that the world is a harsh place. Spider-Man doesn't kill. At least that's what he's heard from people, not the kid himself. He doesn't get that death and destruction doesn't stop because he decides to become a hero. It doesn't just stop when one person you love dies. It keeps going and it never ends until it kills you too. Hey, like 4 minutes on landing, Peter grumbled like a teenager who's been grounded for staying up past curfew. He heard Thor give him a lecture. Good, the kid needed one. Yeah? Or maybe he needed a few. So what's your plan, Hotshot? Going to get out there and listen or like guns blazing? Clint said in a dull tone, and Peter shifted a little and rolled his eyes. Don't call me Hotshot, he muttered before saying, and it depends if you have any good plan. If your plan's any good, he shrugged, and was about to walk off before Clint grabbed his arm rather harshly and spun him around. He would not be treated have anyone, especially spoiled brat, talk to him like that. He needed to be set straight and actually punished for his attitude. He had to treat adults with respect, not like they were trying to help him. He needed this. Like Thor said, this isn't a game, Clint said, even as Peter lightly tugged in the grip. He made it tighter and watched a flash of panic go through Peter's eyes before determination, and another unreadable look flooded over it before continuing. So you better stop treating it like one. Stop acting as if you know everything. I don't know everything, Peter agreed. But it didn't sound like a confession. Clint growled, gripped harder, and Peter had a flash of fear in his eyes this time. Clint barely caught it. Not listening to orders? Go off on your own thing. If that's not true, tell me, kid. Why do you act as if you're better than everyone? Clint's voice rose and hit in his angry whisper, venom dripping from every word. The kid did not flinch at that as he ripped his arm away, and Clint was sure he used more strength than he meant to as the older man stumbled back. I'm not, asshole. The kid wasn't afraid of him. That was weird because the only one who wasn't afraid of him immediately was Tony. He only poked him and never even mentioned Hulk. But Tony Stark was Tony Stark. You could hardly settle as a good example for young upcoming heroes such as Peter, who also happened to be his own entity. The more Bruce spent time around him, he hardly knew how Harley ended up being so responsible. Much more responsible than his adopted father. He was also worrying because he was a goddamn kid who didn't know the kinds of danger he was around when Bruce or the Hulk, or maybe he did. As Bruce said, Peter was turning out to be an unpredictable anomaly. Every other Avenger was careful around Bruce for the first couple months of being on the team. Eventually, they were just as carefree as him. As Tony was, but Peter, he was not afraid of him. Sure, he didn't talk to the kid personally, but when he did, the boy seemed pretty happy to talk to him. The only reason they didn't talk much was because Bruce was terrified that he was going to hurt Peter physically, that is. He wasn't so attached to him that he could actually do any mental or physiological harm. And even if he could, this is for the best. Peter stayed away from him. Bruce stayed away anyways. Parker had a good way of pushing people's buttons, and unlike Harley, Peter didn't have a parental figure that donned a protective suit of armor. Even if Peter had superpowers, Hulk could crush him in one swing of a fist. The kid seemed like a good kid at first. He was shy for the first half of the mission. He kept to himself, and they thought he was listening. They were Avengers after all. And what kind of a kid doesn't listen to the Avengers? Peter Parker, apparently. Turns out he wasn't listening. He was just too bored to voice it. When he ended up pissing everyone off, it was more than just a little irritating that he never followed orders. And although Bruce didn't like it, there's nothing the Hulk could come out for. Well, it's probably because he didn't follow orders. He did follow us on his own terms. Pissing people off never seemed like a problem for Parker before. Why would it be? He could just stop a car thieves and get cats out of trees, but pissing Bruce or the Hulk off, that was a big danger, not only to Parker, but everyone around him as well. But Peter didn't seem to understand because he was too naive to. Hulk could kill that child with a single finger in no time, and the child seemed to be able to. And all the child seemed to be able to do was taunt and tease, and again piss Bruce the fuck off. But there was this weird feeling whenever he talked to Peter, like the anger he was forcing down to keep the Hulk vanished. The Hulk wanted to come out whenever he was found, but not out of anger, which is weird. But his Hulk hated people. Bruce knew he couldn't afford for the Hulk to come out under any circumstances that didn't require cold green. The kid just didn't seem to know he was putting everyone in danger by being so careless. Forget just himself. He was being too reckless with the repercussions not to have already been sounded. He was a kid who thought that everything would work out because he was a minor, that everyone was safe just because he could swing around in spandex. And yes, well, that was part of the job. The other, much more important part was actually helping and listening, doing what was needed to be done so everyone was safe. You need to know that this was not just a game and could not be reset if he screwed up. That this wasn't training. This wasn't a drill. There was no redos, retakes, or resets when people died. They died. They weren't coming back. And when they died because of him, because of his mistakes, because of a choice he made, and yes, he would have to make those choices eventually, that would eat him up inside, it would never stop hurting. It just didn't. And it didn't just affect him. It affected those other people's families, maybe even more so, because they didn't know the names of everyone they saved, and they didn't know the names of everyone they let down, that they let die. This isn't a game, and the kid needed to know that. Touchdown and free, Peter created as he stomped in from the other room in anger, or what seemed to be anger. He was about to stomp away when Bruce gently grabbed his shoulders, and Peter tensed before he rolled one. "Don't you dare say anything on following orders. I get it." So the others talked to him too? That was good. But it only served to piss Peter off more, which isn't good. I don't think you quite do, Bruce said gently, and Peter ripped his arms back and breathed a little. That's good that Peter knew how to calm himself down. Bruce knew he wasn't completely clueless. He'd been doing his Spider-Man thing long before he was with the Avengers. He just needed to go about it differently, because his old ways of quips and trips weren't going to work for him forever. Why do you even care? Peter muttered and didn't look him in the eye. Good, because that really didn't make him look like good. That really made him look like a kid, like Harley looked whenever he was being a moody teenager, not wanting to leave the lab to do homework. Because things are dangerous out there, and orders are there to keep you safe, Bruce reminded, not coming closer. Peter didn't seem to be wanting to be touched, which Bruce got. He didn't figure Peter had an easy life if he ended up staying right now. Hopefully he wouldn't be the end. That's not why we're going on the mission, he muttered as a reminder, and Bruce sighed. They were going to save other people, true, but you're still a kid, Bruce said. Listen, it will be okay. Just try not to piss off people so much. Peter looked up at him, slightly wounded look, before turning going into the other room. Bruce just barely caught what he muttered, or to try. He reminded him of a soldier. When Steve was young, he wanted to be in the army. He was young and foolish and skinny and small. He had asthma and couldn't even walk to school sometimes because he was so sick all the time. All he ever wanted to do was help people, to prove himself. When he finally joined the army and all that, Steve had finally had a chance to actually do that. They didn't let up in the army training for him. They gave him the same rough treatment as everyone else. They reprimanded him more, in fact. They only pushed him to go hard, even though he was pretty sure they wanted him to quit. When he had an opportunity at the serum and could help people even more so, when he joined the Avengers, when he first saw the kid come in, he thought they were one in the same. He actually got a bit giddy. The thought that the kid wanted to grow. The thought that the kid wanted to fight for the great good. Thought the kid would listen and push hard to impress. He thought he was just a kid trying to help improve himself. He was wrong. The kid didn't seem to have anything to prove to anyone. He didn't follow orders. He didn't push hard to impress. He seemed to get a kick out of annoying everyone with the fact that he could just get away with anything. He didn't want to be a soldier all the same. Steve couldn't help but feel like he was witnessing a bit of a show of the soldier that he came to be, or that he was. Steve could tell without a doubt. He wanted to help people all in his own way, in his own twisted, weird way. He managed to save a bunch of lives, but still his methods were highly unorthodox and inappropriate. So much so that if there was a chance he could so far it that he would probably end up on Asgard. Metaphorically, that is. He didn't think that Thor would even let him have the opportunities of transporting through the Bifrost. I think that's how you pronounce it. He had all the characteristics of a child too young to be in the battlefield, just as Steve had been. But Steve didn't actually get into fights post-serum anyways. Probably like Peter if you substitute a constant modern experiment with unplanned radioactive mischief. Nonetheless, Steve treated him like a soldier because whether he was one or not, and Steve almost positive that he was, somehow that terrified Steve even more. He was fighting with the Avengers under Stephen or Tony's command. He had to listen. He had to follow orders no matter what. No matter at what stakes. He had to stay in line. Except he didn't. Peter, no matter how many times Steve lectured or Natasha reprimanded or Tony snapped, or hell, even Bruce at one point yelled at him, would never, ever follow orders if he didn't agree with them. That was probably the most accurate statement, because sometimes he did follow orders, and Steve figured that he was going to go with the plans he never cared to share with anyone but himself, or he was too tired to actually rebel. It didn't matter the harsh treatment they gave him, because that's what needed to be done in order to save more lives in his mind. This wasn't daycare. If the kid wanted to fight, he had to understand that he was a small, very small piece of the bigger part, much bigger than him, and his wanky agenda of what seemed to be shitting on the Avengers while avenging. He didn't understand what he was fighting for, something bigger, because he was just a damn kid, smaller and younger than Steve ever was. Then he didn't show up for a while, and Steve thought that it was okay, that he was just on leave. But then Fury gave them a mission and muttered or bitched, as Tony so elegantly put it, that they could have used Parker for this mission. And Steve wondered why Fury had just called him. It took Steve a moment to realize that Parker actually turned down Fury when he asked for help to potentially save the world. That's right. That right there was not okay. When Parker did eventually come back, bruised the hell, might he add, Steve had gone off on him, didn't let up, because the kid had made a comment that helpfully reminded him of that. The kid was submissive for a while, until he wasn't, and bit back that no, in fact, he was doing Shield a favor. Steve had been confused, and he still was, but the harshness in Parker's voice when he said, and Steve croaked, "Stay in your fucking lane, Rogers." And Steve had never asked him about it again. If Fury had already told you, then you don't need to know. Be a good soldier and march off forever, was the logical appeal. And Steve had left him alone about that, but he didn't much, and made that very known in a grumble as he walked away, electing a laugh from Parker that made Steve's head swiggle. It didn't stop him from lecturing Parker about the other shit, for lack of better words. He did. 2 minutes, Parker said from the doorway. Crossing his arms, he shifted from one side to the other as he waited for Steve to look over. Steve stared himself at the face of a highly uncomfortable looking boy, which was odd. Parker is usually so well trained in his facial expressions. Who told you that? Steve asked. For a better segue into the conversation I was about to have, Peter looked like he knew what was going to happen, but he didn't want to. He bit the line anyways. Mr. Stark. It was weird how Parker did in fact have the currency to address them by formal names such as Mr., Miss, and Captain and Agent, but he never did add so random. He never said those things ironically, only if he was teasing. Steve didn't want to do this. It felt wrong on many levels, because this kind of thing was common sense among the army. Steve wasn't like at a soldier, so he was no nonsense, but he was nonetheless, and he shouldn't act or be treated any differently. Sir, Steve reminded stoically, and Peter looked confused for a second, cocked his head and blinked at him, almost like a confused puppy. "Pardon me?" he asked, as if he didn't believe what he's heard. Either that, or he was just confused by the random word just spoken. Or he didn't expect the conversation to go this way. Honestly, neither did Steve. "Mr. Stark, sir." Steve said for him and stood up to his full length as the look of understanding crossed Peter's face. Then the look of anger mixed with something else. He watched the anger slowly seep out of his face and into his eyes, which was terrifying. But Steve could pin the emotion he kept spread throughout his body. And what the ever-loving fuck? A kid shouldn't be able to do that. "I'm not calling you sir, Captain," he said slightly. And Steve had to hand it to the boy. He managed to keep most of the anger out of his voice, but the attitude had to drop. "You, Bill, because you may not be on the Avengers yet, but you're fighting with them, and Steve was cut off. "I'm sorry, what?" Peter said in a voice that made him sound a little more disbelieving than mad now. Steve raised an eyebrow for him to explain his interruption. "Whoever said I'm going to be an Avenger?" Steve sighed. This kid. That's That's why Fury had you shadow us. Steve was getting annoyed with these cut-offs because it was hard to prove Peter Parker wrong, especially when the kid couldn't really prove himself right non-verbally. Verbally, most of the time. He never had to. He was always so irritatingly right all the time, but one day Steve hoped that it was a terrible hope that that the Parker luck would run out. He didn't know how ironic that was. That's not why he had me show you guys. Cute term, by the way. Peter scoffed and shook his head. Steve here fired a little at his arrogance and what he implied. Then tell me what you think you're here for. Steve, in all of his wisdom, glory, could not fathom how the kid before him could just shrug and throw away all the anger that Steve had been pulling in his eyes before. How could a kid have that much control over his emotions? It was scary and worrying and insulting and just not fair. Steve had barely an ounce of that self-control, and Parker, from the look of it, seemed to have an endless supply of it. Don't know, but it's not to be an Avenger, Peter said, and Steve opened his mouth, but as he glared at him, you don't get to decide that. Steve held up his hands in slight surrender. You're right about that, but Fury put you on the team for a reason, Steve reasoned, and Peter nodded. You're right, and if you need to know, he'd tell you, Peter said so casually and shrugged. Steve felt his anger flare a bit again, but not at Peter. At least not directly. And he told you that? Steve growled at him in a mocking way. Parker didn't have bite on it, though. Maybe if you asked him, Parker said, and finally looked at him with a confused, almost smug look. Have you? He said in a way too sweet, kind of innocent way. Ask him, that is. Steve shook his head. You can't just ask the director of S.H.I.E.L.D. that, Steve said. That's not what good soldiers do. They don't ask those kind of questions. Then I think you answered your own question, Captain, Peter said, stepping in like he was trying to claim Steve's territory. What makes you and I different is that I'm not a puppet soldier who puts my head down when I have to, Peter said almost snarlily, and Steve couldn't help but let his anger stir inside him. He knew Parker was just trying to get under his skin, and he knew the kid was trying to make him say or do something he'd soon regret. But the way he knew exactly which buttons to push, the way he didn't hesitate in pushing them, the way Parker was so damn frustrating. It makes you think that you aren't meant to be treated like a soldier in training, Steve said suddenly. It was unexpected, but didn't seem to catch Peter off guard, not in the least, even as if he never hesitated to answer. Because I'm not, Peter said, pushed off to step forward to Steve. And I'd rather not be, he said, in the same voice he used to taunt bad guys in. Steve snarled and tried all the way, so he'd be towering over Parker, who only made it 2 steps in the room and wasn't moving to claim any more ground, staying near the door so he could run out at any given moment, which is probably one of the most effective and best strategies for any given situation. Steve only saw a coward and a scared little kid facing his fears all at once, because Parker was never scared, right? And that's what's so bad. And what's so bad about it? What goes through your head to make you hate the fact that you're not just fighting for yourself? What makes you so afraid to be a soldier? Steve asked. Those were all rhetorical, but Parker didn't answer them like he had, as if he kept glaring up at Steve, seemingly undaunted. Why do you refuse to be what you are? Steve had meant that Peter was a soldier, whether he liked it or not. And there were so many things that could have been interpreted in that one sentence, but whether it was to be a good point, or the fact that they just didn't care, or to generally get Steve to shut up about it, he answered a question. He asked the unanswered question. Why don't you like being a soldier? Steve was waiting with the kids actually processed what he said, but in the moment, a small window of time when his opinion actually counted. But Peter's answer would later forever haunt Steve because it sucked the first time. Follow my lead, soldier, he was trying. Do exactly what I tell you, he was trying. Come here, he was trying. Of course, in the middle of battle, he was usually doing his own thing. It usually didn't matter so long as he did the job. He actually got the job done. Usually he didn't care. Usually he wasn't so scared, mad, and confused. Usually he didn't feel this betrayal and alone. Usually he didn't feel like he had to prove anything to the Avengers. But now he had to follow orders. He promised Fury that he would at least try not to be a little shit this time. He thought that he could do it. He wanted to do it because the Avengers gave up ordering to do things when it wasn't absolutely necessary, and he couldn't. Then, no sweat, they usually didn't care anyways, except today apparently. Today they wanted to let him know that he was a screw up. Today they wanted to yell and recommend him about following orders. Today, of all fucking days, they wanted to let him know about how much they did not believe him. Now he had this weird feeling, a feeling he hasn't felt since he was 11, that he needed to fucking prove himself to these entitled assholes. He wasn't a coward. He didn't think he was better. He knew the dangers. He wasn't a soldier. Not anymore. Not anymore. So why the fuck did he want to prove to these guys that he wasn't what they thought he was? Today he was actually trying to be nice and follow orders because Fury had gently, at least for Fury, and politely at least for Fury, asked him to follow orders. To try, just this once, and he was doing this because he wanted to, at least at first. But now, it felt like he needed to, and he didn't need to do anything since he had graduated high school. Cap had given him a specific set of instructions. They were easy enough to follow, but then Tony decided to ask him to be on the other side of the battlefield and do the completely opposite side of attacks, and then Natasha decided now was a great time to order him around, and he wasn't needed somewhere else. And it mattered that they ended up all coming up to him, but he had different things they needed to do. Just like the original orders, he kind of just branked down and skipped to the end. Getting a bit rusty, huh? Cap said he needed some monster goblin thing revved up, and Tony said he needed the alien goblin thing beat up. Natasha said she needs the transportation they were using, but in the end he only had one thing: beat up the bad guys, and that's exactly what he did. Too many orders plus not enough time to equip a panicked spider. Here's his equation: 20 plus TI plus 1 equals PS. Logic. Or actually no, it was an equation, but he had no time for balancing, god damn it. But that did sound a lot more nice than this. He showed his work for later, but now he ended up beating them all up and webbing them after, and then collecting their transports. So there, everyone's supposed to be happy. But they weren't. They kept on yelling at him, and his vision was all getting furry, and he had a bunch of cut all of him, and everything was too loud, and oh no. This was exactly not the right time to have a sensory overload. Absolutely not the right time. Couldn't his anxiety suck it up for like 2 more seconds here, at least, so he could fucking breathe? Pretty please? It would also help if you stopped yelling at me. They didn't. You didn't follow my lead. You should have wrapped up the bad guy, those guys up, not all of them, Steve said in a stern tone, looking down at Peter with a painfully hard glare. It reminded him of his own commander. What was his name? Don't think about it. He's not ready for this. Something with an S. Stop thinking about it. Can't he just follow, I don't know, one order? Or was it a C? You're going to phobia. Think about it. I swear, there are 3-year-olds who listen better than you. Cut it. Stop. He literally gave you the easiest orders to follow. Cut kid, don't you dare think about it. If you can't match for these, what are you even doing here, Carter? That's it. Oh my god, I told you. Are you even listening to us, Parker? Oh, sweetie, do you think he can actually hear you over all this white noise? That's fucking hilarious. But seriously, he was going to pass out puke if they don't get him out of here like yesterday. Yeah, and you can't just web them like that. If your webs were any weaker, then they would have gone out. Tony glared at him, and it made him sink further into himself. He couldn't breathe, and it was not the asthma. Please help. He worked on the webbing when he got the fucking chemicals. Penning for better chemicals. He used the cheap high school shit, so bear with him. But he worked so hard to make sure they were strong binding instead of just silly swing. They could carry a full person in his weight with the added force and add all the physics stuff. Abbott, he was skinny and didn't weigh as much as he should. No, he's not being self-deprecating because himself over his genius. Everything else about him could go in the garbage. Probably already has, but this was the best thing he could do with the materials he had. And you know what? Fuck you, Stark. Not everyone was a fucking billionaire. Some of us are actually broke. Thank you very much. Not everyone inherits their family's multi-billionaire company. Not everyone can get a fucking job that supports your entire well-being, especially if you're a minor. Not everyone can hold a job, especially when you're a fucking CEO. So back off, dipshit. I'm getting flashbacks. I just asked for one transplant. Was it so hard? And Tasha probably was worse. Peter wanted to cry. He really wanted to cry or scream, but instead he let us sigh. Screaming and crying wouldn't do anyone any good, but waste time. Maybe it would help him feel better, but it wouldn't be worth the hassle. But damn, his head hurt, and his vision was going blurry, and he needed to get out of here because everything was too loud, and the Avengers were still lecturing, yelling, and putting him down, and at this point he could only catch pieces of what they were saying, and even that was working his ass off. He did not want to see flashbacks. You can't even follow simple orders. Not here. Children should not be allowed in the field. I'm not here. What Fury was thinking about bringing an irresponsible little. I need to get out. I need to go, not even realizing that I was cutting Steve off mid-sentence because he couldn't hear him. He wasn't sure if his voice gave anything away, and right now he didn't care. He stood up on legs. He couldn't hear anything but loud muffles, sirens and screams, and cars beeping, skidding, and crashings of rubble. It was all too much, and he couldn't be there because it hurt. He could hardly manage to shoot a web and stumble in the right direction and swing off. Please help. By Spider-Man, Fury was more determined than asked the Avengers. Peter, no matter what, he did rarely skip to briefings, even if he knew he was going to get yelled at. He only skipped if he was injured, and in his language that meant any form of unconscious, no stab wound isn't severe. Come on, Fury, stop asking questions. Or if he had some other pressing matters to attend to, and that right now is what scared Fury even more than any form of fresh wound the kid would ever have. He was sorely hoped it was a farmer. He ditched us after the battle, Steve grumbled, and Fury sighed. Here they were at again. The kid was probably going to be murdered by Steve Rogers on the accountability of pissing him off too much. That was probably too much to be hopeful. The kid was too stubborn to die. What did he do? Fury asked, already knowing the answer. It was a formality. He didn't follow orders, everyone said dramatically, and Fury gave a long, suffering growl. This was getting tiring. When did they even bother trying anymore? This kid. They literally had to talk not even 10 hours ago. How the fuck did he manage to screw up this bad? Maybe he wasn't the one to screw up. Why did you even recruit a snot-nosed kid? Clint said, his feet on the table looking like he didn't care, but he wanted an explanation. Fury knew Barton enough by this point, to know that Barton never asked questions, so when he did, it made them worth something. Unlike Parker, who asked stupid, seemingly meaningless questions and got terrifying answers to almost everything based off of that. He's dangerous, Fury said, not answering the question fully. The kid was hell more than just dangerous, he was lethal, which is a better word for dangerous that describes Peter Parker perfectly. You know, Fury, that's the answer we always get, Tony said, and most of the Avengers looked as if they were agreeing with him. For once, Parker was could make people who never meant to even meet agree with each other. Yeah, he got some friggin' powers, big deal. He's not trained. He's a kid. Yeah, the kid needs to be modded, but why not do it like Defenders? Own the modeling, but not a part of the Avengers initiative. Why did the kid have to be? Natasha asked in her own monotone. She cared a lot more about the situation than she let on, but if she could see Parker's potential beyond him just being a kid, she would jump on him for helping her with her little problem. She just had to think about child soldiers. But Fury did too, and Parker was not a soldier, or an acid though. He was free to do whatever he pleased, and sometimes that meant a little treat for Fury to get to maul him up close, when he cleared to go on the Avengers missions. Fury furrowed his brows and scanned the room for Peter, even though he knew he wasn't there. Something wasn't adding up. Peter never thought all was pure hell. It was expected, but following them back before briefing each time. Without fail, he always faded his music, never skipping it, and never let anyone else take blame for mistakes he made, no matter how severe. So where was he? When the others looked a bit confused, Fury didn't answer the question they were asking. He never did. Why did he leave? Was he hurt? That made them all pause. They didn't actually know if Spider-Man was hurt. They just yelled at him. And Fury wiped a hand over his head behind him in an irritating voice. The Avengers looked equally annoyed, but Tony started typing his Stark pad anyway. Spiked Fury backtracked. How could he think these guys could find him? He obviously ran from them, so the last people on Earth who would find them was saying to him, "Fuck, I'll do it. You can't." Tony Stark made a pissed off noise. What's that supposed to mean? He asked loudly. It meant the kid didn't want to talk to you guys. It means you fucked up, Fury said honestly, and dialed Peter's number to hear it ring 4 times before the kid answered. What? His voice was scratchy and hoarse, like he'd been strangled. He probably was. He sounded like he was choking down something, like a sob or a lump or another emotion. But no, it was probably bio saliva. Fury didn't care right now. Where the fuck are you? Fury sounded irritated as he ground that out through gritted teeth, as if it would be filtered for his anger. Not that. Peter shot back like the little shit he was and groaned in misery. And he wasn't being melodramatic at all. She sounded like the kid was dying a slow and painful death. Fury plowed on without empathy to the voice on the phone. Why? Those are statements, not orders. Demands, not commands. Peter knew the difference. The Avengers didn't. It was the only way to get Peter not to completely be in a several little shit and somewhat cooperate, and sometimes if the order wasn't stupid. Why do you care? He heard one of the Avengers stop, as if proving a point. He rolled his eyes, and he heard muffled, wrenching shit. He looked to the Avengers who were looking at him intensely. Are you sick? At that, the Avengers whistled, but he heard Peter spit something for groaning again. Fuck off! He muttered, but didn't hang up. It looked like he just dropped his phone, probably put it on speaker. How did the kid have anything at all? He barely ate. He couldn't help but wonder. What the hell? Why did you say you was sick? You should have. Fury was cut off by Peter's loud moaning. He didn't want to lecture. He simply sharply glared at the Avengers, who looked mostly annoyed, if not a bit guilty. I said, fuck off. I'm not sick. Wow, the kid was really trying to play his game. He just threw up on the phone with the S.H.I.E.L.D. directors. I bet Peter was always a bit unprofessional titles meant jack shit to him anyways. You could rule the world. He would still call you out and kick your ass if he needed to. Don't want to in that matter. Kid, I just heard you toss your cookies into whatever you did. Fury was hoping it was a toilet or sink, not a trash can in a Queen's Alley, because no matter what the kid had put him through, he didn't deserve that. Yeah, but I ain't sick, Peter insisted. He sounded a little tired now, not so irritable. Unlike Fury, he was about to explode in pain, impending anger. If you weren't sick then, Fury's eye twitched in irritation at the kid coming off again, as he seemed to do many times, and not give any shit in the world about it. Fury, I said it twice, and I'll say it one more time. Fuck off, Peter said pointedly, and it sounded like it had been bad, whatever it was going on with him, to call Fury, without sarcasm. To call him Fury without, sarcasm. Fury dropped it because he didn't know how to voice any questions related to the topic. Now he hated how Paul could do that. Words are powerful. The right ones can make or break a person. Would you hear that, a friend? Fine. Fury sighed and moved on. Do you want to explain why you went off instead of telling the Avengers you were going to puke? It was met with an irritated grumble at Snipe. Fury heard someone muffle's voice in the background, but it wasn't Peter's. He couldn't make it out anything else. Then there was another person, wherever he was. Peter decided to answer him, but not out of fear. More out of wanting to get the hell away from this conversation as quickly as possible. I tried what you said. It was the worst experience I've ever had at the pressure of participating in. So thanks for that, you delusional bastard. Now I feel like shit. Fuck off into whatever hellhole you came from and leave me alone. Have a terrific day. The calmed before he could ask any questions, and Fury slid a hand down his face. The Avengers hadn't heard a conversation. Frankly, he wished they had, just so they could see what he had to deal with when they were making it difficult for the kid. At this point, he honestly couldn't blame the kid. His words exaggerated a little bit, but his actions always told the truth. They fucked up this time. Peter did the things that would save the most people and got yelled at. No wonder he was always trying to get out of group missions and not following orders. He could always take the best course of action, even if it meant doing it the hard way and alone. What happened? Steve asked, like the good captain of a team of superheroes, and supreme asshole he was. Or at least, that's what he was supposed to be. He was sick. Fury sighed, and Steve immediately straightened. It takes a lot to make him sick, he said pointedly. Steve deflated. Enhanced mechanism? Bruce asked under his breath. Fury ignored the question that the scientist had surely had by now. It was turning around in his brain, figuring out a ton of equations Fury hadn't even known existed, but nor did he care. We didn't know he was sick. He seemed fine on the plane over. Tony muttered, his forehead pinched in confusion. Maybe he was faking it, Clint suggested. We were lecturing. Maybe he used that excuse to leave and not pay for the consequences. Clint shrugged and Thor bristled at what seemed to be anger. They shut down that train of thought because it probably wasn't true, and he didn't need the Avengers to be going off on an all... He didn't need the Avengers going on an all-out war with this teenager spider kid. That would be embarrassing when they lost. Tell it to the kid who was throwing up on the phone, insisting he wasn't sick. Fury said in a deadpan, and Clint looked disappointed, while Thor visibly calmed down. Those little. If he didn't think he was sick, then why did he leave? Natasha growled. It didn't add up. She was right. Maybe he just needs space, to feel better, then come back, but it seemed like he was coming back anytime soon. Definitely not for a debrief. Do you all want to be watched while you toss cookies? Fury asked with a raised brow. Nobody answered. So he continued. What were the orders he didn't follow? Fury asked the group. He was going to get to the fucking bottom of this. He rubbed up the baddies with just as well as we said to incapacitate them, not shoot them with silly string. Clint answered, and Fury had to do a double take. Did he hear that right? The kid followed orders, and they yelled at him for it. You are all idiots, he laughed, but not with humor. Those webs have the strength to lift 10 planes and then some, and they're not breaking anytime soon. He slid a hand down his face and stopped at his mouth. God, he's never going to follow orders again. He's just going to get yelled at for it. And yelled at for not doing it. Oh my God, you officially found a way to make this worse. He's never going to listen again, he muttered to himself. It was silent for a moment. Shit. And that was the end of chapter 1. Thank you for listening. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.